All right, Kenty, here is the overview of my armies and army setups. I have all of the champions, and most of them are maxed out, so I think there's going to be some things that I can do with my armies that you're not going to be able to do with yours. I also have a very siege based approach. I don't really use, excuse me, I don't really use horses for taking down gates. I almost never use pure horse armies in attacks. I kind of will use them as a last resort. But I noticed a lot of the lower key players and newer players do use more horse based tactics, so I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm just a bit stuck in my way. So, anyways, for what it's worth, this is how I am doing it. A lot of it is probably force of habit, but take from it what you will. So I've got 9 armies. I have 3 siege armies. There's these 3 here. These are all executioners, and they have my trebuchets. I also have 2 martial armies that I use for clearing. So there's the smokes and pepperoni one. This one's probably my single best army. This is also a really good setup for doing mine clearings, and I'll come back to that one. And then I have a shittier one called Cool Ranch. It's over here. This one I actually mostly just use for killing reinforcements, and it becomes a bit of a lure. But it's not bad. It can do a clearing job as well. And then I've got one, we used to call these kill boxes back in the day because the way that the AI worked earlier on in the game was you could create a box shape with swords and a box shape with arrows, and then you'd put a sword in the middle, and then the troops would go to the sword and ignore the arrows and then would get killed by the arrows, or you could also do it with catapults. So we used to call that a kill box. That obviously does not work anymore, but we still call them that. And these are exclusively for killing reinforcements. This one's really good at it because it has that double T4 catapult. I'll come back to this one too. And then I've got just a couple shitty lures. I'm mostly using these for mining. They're really just leftover troops. There's nothing really that ideal about these. I try to not use them in attacks, but they're there to use as a lure if I have to use them as a lure. It's really just all my leftover troops and leftover gear. Even after playing for 3+ years, I still do not have enough troops to do things exactly as I'd want, and I definitely don't have enough battalion gear to do exactly what I want. So those are just sort of leftovers. And then I do have one horse army, this dirty lancing one, and I mostly use it for defense. As you can see, I don't have the best horse champions on this army. I have them in my siege armies mainly. Usually I'm defending against players that are shittier than me, and good calves will just get lured around by a decent attacker. Like, say, if you want to use a T4 cav on, I think her name is Alyssa. Yeah, Elysia. I'd had to take the T4 cav off of here because it just wouldn't die. So I've actually intentionally made this a little bit shittier than it could be. But overall, it's where I have leftover horse parts, and I've got the better champions and better gear elsewhere. That's just how I approach things. Okay, so every siege army has the same pattern. I'll start with this one. This is typically the siege army that I use first in an attack. So this will be the first army on the field. The pattern is basically you want some element that can soak damage. So these are like the tanks or meat shield. You can use swords or calves. They have pros and cons. They both work perfectly fine. The cav is obviously much stronger. It can take a lot more hits and live through it. Deals decent damage too, and then the sword is just a little bit more flexible. So a sword can clear a tower if the enemy doesn't reinforce right away. And the other thing that's nice about a sword and more versatile is a sword is generally going to move forward into the base. It's going to take the path that you would, it's more likely to take a path that you would like through the base. So if you're using it to protect your trebuchets from garrison fire, the swords are a little more reliable. They're a little more likely to move ahead of the trebs in the way you want, whereas cavalry or any horse, of course, is going to go for, especially in the first wave of an attack, it's going to go for the gate that's on the outside that has the most direct path to the keep. So these cavalry will often kind of fuck off down the side and become really tricky to use as a shield for the treb. So, I mean, they're both good. I would just say the swords are a little more versatile. For an opening army, though, it's probably not going to have to go into the base to the same extent as your other siege armies. So that's why I've put a really good cavalry champ in this opening army. This Julia one's really awesome. It's got a damage bonus, but it's just really good at staying alive for some reason. I've also had that one cav like kill K33's entire armies more than once. So that's a really good champ, and so I've put it here where it's important. For the same reason I've got my T4 cats here. I don't have enough of these, and I definitely don't have enough gear to put the T4 cats in all my siege armies. So I've prioritized putting it here so that it can kill the help kill the defenders' reinforcements. I mean, ultimately, what you're trying to do with an opening army, of course, is get at least one wall down so that you can have access to the base and hopefully have access to tower doors for clearing. And then, of course, the archers are there to help kill the reinforcements as well, and kind of similar to that sword cav dynamic between catapults and arrows. The calves are obviously way better at dealing damage to the reinforcements, but the arrows do a good job of that as well. And then on top of that, they have the flexibility to go towards the base and start clearing towers. So they're a good army. This opening army is a good place to put some of your better troops damage-wise as well, just to get those opening towers and to kill the reinforcements. So the other two follow the same pattern. This is another one. I typically use this in second. So here, because it's used second, typically second siege, I've used two swords instead of a cav. And the reason is just I find that this army needs to do a little more clearing than other siege armies. And so I just like having the swords here because they're more flexible. They can get on the towers and whatnot. They're also more likely, as I said earlier, to move according to how you would plan to move your trebuchets forward, whereas calves will kind of fuck off in different directions sometimes. So it's a bit of a safer bet. This champ, Basilia, whoever she is, this is, arguably the best champion of them all. I have her here just, I really prioritize siege, so I find this middle siege army is usually where you need to get a lot of work done. You need to get potentially 2 walls, and they're really critical walls that if you don't get it, the rest of your sequence all gets thrown off. So I've made this army really good for that reason, and Basila is pretty phenomenal and flexible. I don't have enough T4 cats to do another army of them, so I use a ballista here instead. They're also a little more flexible in that they can do some more work clearing towers. I really never use catapults to clear towers. They almost always get smucked. Especially people at my level tend to have a lot of trebuchets on platforms. So the cats just typically can't get close enough to do any real damage, but the ballistas can. And you can also use the ballistas to do a machine sacrifice. So that's when you have to drive your machines, so specifically your trebuchets, into range of a trebuchet platform. So you can move a sacrifice machine ahead of them so that they trigger that platform. It fires. You can hopefully retreat it fast enough that it doesn't actually die. And then you get, something around 8 seconds to get your trebuchets in place and take the shot. Without them coming under fire from that platform. So that comes in handy in a lot of cases. machine sacrifices are pretty cool. And then my last siege army is pretty similar. Again, same pattern. I'm using, it's just laid out a little bit different, but I have the sword up in the top left, the cav in the bottom right, and then I've got 2 arrows and a ballista. And that's that. They're all kind of the same. For clearing, this is my best one, the smokes and pepperoni. This is a pretty strong army overall. I was doing those defense events, so I have different banners on, but just to mention, I think, say you're doing an attack on a player, you would always want to use these 2 banners, the griffin and the lion, and for the right terrain. So for snow, I would always want to have these 2. So the idea with this clearing army is to clear towers and platforms. So I have my best archer champ, this elf one. Got 2 decent health sword champions. And then I use Tarek here, and I will sometimes switch him out for the ginger axe champ. I think his name's Baldric. That'll work pretty well, but Tarek is doing a lot of mine stuff lately. We had that whole mine event, so Tarek is really good for running ahead of the other shit and soaking up the damage so that the other troops are protected. If you're attacking a temple keeper and you're going from behind, which you often have to do on the kind of OG bases, so you end up needing to do a lot of clearing to get the treb platforms down, and having Tarek in there can be really helpful, just to shield the other shit. So I definitely would advocate for Tarek in this kind of army. He's not going to get the horse boost since this is a martial, but he's a pretty awesome champ as it is, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. Okay, and then like I mentioned, I have another one that's like that. It's just a shittier version. So, I mean, same concepts. You want some damage soaking troops. So I've got a cavalry and a sword, and then you want some damaging troops. So I've got Expo and Archer, and I've got an axe as well for dealing damage. So this one can be used for clearing towers, or more often I'll just use it to kill the reinforcements, and then I'll have a siege army after it, or a clearing army after it, the other clearing army. And that's it. Like I said, these ones are just shitty. I just currently have them with random stuff. I didn't really think it over, but for any kind of lure, you want to have some damage soaking troops and damage dealing troops. That's really the pattern you want to do. And you just can kind of work with what you have available. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. This took way longer than I thought, so sorry, 13 minutes. All right, bye.